an important part of Geshe-la's book, and so I want to talk a little bit about it. The six paramitas, or six perfections, can be seen as a path to enlightenment in and of themselves. Only by engaging in the practice of these six virtuous acts, and by avoiding the downfalls or obstacles that arise, can we ever really truly generate bodhicitta, the spontaneous desire to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So when obstacles and downfalls arise, we purify them and we rectify them, always returning to the path prescribed in the six paramitas. The first paramita is the perfection of giving. Now, whenever we give something out of spontaneous and unconditional desire to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, we call this the perfection of giving. The principle behind this is that there's no point in clinging to our possessions or clinging to our skills, our talents, whether material, intellectual, spiritual. Those things that we possess only acquire value the moment that we give them away freely for the benefit of others. Now, there are three main focuses in the perfection of giving. One is the giving of material things. Two is the giving of the Dharma. And third is the giving of unconditional love. See, when we give material things, we're supporting the circulation of the good that flows to us, through us, and all around us. And we recognize that all phenomena are impermanent, so they have no intrinsic value. Giving supports the practice of non-attachment. It supports the practice of recognizing that we're all in this together, and that only by sharing that which we do not need, or sharing that which someone needs more than us, are we able to open ourselves up to continue to receive. Now, when we give the Dharma, we're giving something of far greater value than material possessions, because we're contributing to the elimination of suffering. And similarly, when we give unconditional love, or fearlessness as it's called in some Buddhist texts, it recognizes that whatever is not love is fear, and that fear is the cause of all delusion. Therefore, to give or support the process of eliminating fear by unconditionally loving, by saying, I love you, I am sorry, please forgive me, and thank you, we eliminate delusion, which is the cause of suffering. Now, the next perfection is the perfection of moral discipline. For the Buddhists, this concept of moral discipline doesn't arise from some sort of superstitious belief that we have some mythical god or heavenly tyrant whose whims and laws we have to follow or we're going to get punished. It's not something that arises out of fear at all. The perfection of moral discipline is motivated by the generation of bodhicitta. The perfection of moral discipline is a proactive decision on our part to abstain from non-virtuous actions, from non-virtuous thoughts or conditions. The key to successfully engaging in this practice involves mindfulness and awareness. You see, the perfection is achieved by the threefold avoidance of the non-virtuous acts, the discipline of keeping the Dharma, and the discipline of performing acts which benefit others. And once again, we were able to practice this by staying grounded in a place of love, staying grounded in a place where we want to do and say and be everything that can help to eliminate suffering in others. Now, the next perfection is the perfection of patience. Maintaining a mind that's able to bear injury, suffering, or profound dharma without fear of reprisal, without compromising that dharma, motivated by the desire to benefit all sentient beings, is the mark of the perfection of patience. You see, there may be times when you'll be persecuted for what you believe, but when you bear that patiently and recognize that that persecution only comes from someone not truly understanding these principles, then that's part of the practice of the perfection of patience. The practice involves abstaining from the desire for retaliation or being willing to endure pain as a means of understanding and ending suffering. And it's the faithful practice of studying and applying the Dharma every single day, staying rooted in your practice, remembering the importance of sending out love, taking on suffering. Tonglen. The essential truth of suffering is that it never arises from external conditions. Those things that try our patience, cause us to desire retaliation, or distract our focus from the Dharma are causes which arise from within ourselves. They're causes that are reflections of something going on inside us. So until we take 100% responsibility for everything that we experience, we're contributing to suffering. When we begin to take 100% responsibility, then we're able to begin to clear and clean those things which contribute to that experience in our lives. When we bear these things patiently, no real suffering is possible because the impermanent nature of those conditions will always result in their dissolution. Now, the next perfection is the perfection of enthusiastic effort. Now, I've studied a number of texts in which this perfection is simply called the perfection of effort, but I believe that sort of translation, while accurate, could be misleading to Westerners. Years ago, there were 2 cats living in our hermitage, and I completely dreaded emptying the litter box. In fact, it's safe to assume that the only thing I disliked more than emptying the litter box was coming home to the smell of a dirty cat box. So it took some real effort for me to clean that litter box every couple days, but there was no enthusiasm in the act, so it wasn't a virtuous practice at all. During my service as a Catholic priest, I would see members of our church putting their collection envelopes in the basket every week and almost doing it with a look of disgust or a look of contempt. Giving money to assist us in the work that we did took real effort for some of these folks, but it was never an effort of love. It was simply the result of their feeling it was something they had to do or not wanting to be embarrassed by the basket passing them and not seeing anything put in. In fact, some people actually put empty envelopes in the basket. Enthusiastic effort sees every action as an opportunity to positively contribute to the eradication of suffering in our world. So if I keep the litter box clean, the cats don't suffer this discomfort of infections that could arise from a dirty environment. I won't suffer the negative results of being in that unhealthy environment. And others, especially those of us with compromised immune systems, will not suffer the effects of life-threatening disease either, which could arise from the bacteria breeding in that environment. So the prescription for the perfection of enthusiastic effort calls us to be mindful and avoid procrastination, attachment, and non-virtuous actions and distraction or discouragement. Now, let's talk about the next perfection, which is the perfection of mental stability, something I've not often been accused of. The stable mind is a mind in which concentration, awareness, and presentness, the act of mindfully being present, comprise the entire constitution of our practice. It's about being present, being fully aware in every action and every thought and every condition. Now, if we develop this perfection through the practice of meditation, through the practice of mindfulness training, then at first our mind might seem like it gets a little bit scattered now and then. It might seem like you're a little unstable, a little bit incapable of sustaining focus for a very long time. In my personal life, I think that Parkinson's has been a remarkable teacher, because there are times like now when the Parkinson's is acting up and I have to do something. I have to record this video. And so the practice of meditation, the practice of the perfection of mental stability, helps me to focus by remaining in the moment. My mind might feel like scrambled eggs at times. I might be a little bit self-conscious about being a little bit twitchy or being stiff. And I may not have the pureness of that focus on the material. But by coming back to the moment, which I'm doing today every other moment, I'm reminding myself just to stay present so that I don't let this temporary condition become an obstacle to sharing the Dharma. So yeah, at first your mind might seem a little scattered. It might seem like you're a little unstable, but continue your practice, and that practice always yields the fruit of mental stability and concentration. And that brings us to the next perfection, the sort of the ultimate expression in the 6 Paramitas, which is the perfection of wisdom. The perfection of wisdom is the ability to understand with an unclouded mind all of the notions of delusional thought. True wisdom arises when we are able to distinguish between what's virtuous and what's non-virtuous, what's real and what's not real, and when we're ever mindful that all phenomena are impermanent. So it brings us peace and clarity of mind. And when such wisdom arises out of bodhicitta, out of the desire to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings, it's called the perfection of wisdom. It's sort of in a unique way, the perfection of wisdom increases exponentially with the practice of the other 5 perfections. For example, when one responds to seeing a homeless person and they give them something to eat without the expectation of getting anything in return, without hoping that somebody notices that they're giving that person something, then they accumulate the merits of the perfection of giving. By not expecting anything in return, one would not be offended if the homeless person didn't say thank you, or if they even spoke hurtful words and said, oh, a hamburger, I don't like hamburgers. So the perfection of patience arises out of the perfection of giving. And these two are informed and motivated by a clear appreciation of the perfection of moral discipline. You're responding to that hungry person and recognizing that hungry person may be angry. When we don't eat for 4 or 5 hours, we get a little cranky and bitchy ourselves. Imagine being homeless and going for days without something to eat. It's easier to understand when you stop and think about that, why somebody might respond a little bit cranky or bitter or bitchy. And one who has a clear appreciation of the perfection of moral discipline, who's done this with an open heart, a heart of compassion, will also find increasing peace and stability of mind. There's the practice of the 6 Paramitas, and this class itself has been an excellent exercise for me to remind me of the importance of these aspects of my practice. And so this past week has been an incredibly peaceful week. And some of the things that might have thrown me a little bit off guard and gotten me a little bit tense have not bothered me this week, because I'm at a place of true peace. Now, somebody who's done this has that peace of mind. They're able to see the insubstantial and impermanent nature of phenomena. They're able to recognize that the money that they're giving is, or the food or whatever it is that they're giving to somebody in need, is impermanent and has no intrinsic value other than the value of being put into action. So this awareness of emptiness arises through the perfection of wisdom, and it contributes to the accumulation of the merits of wisdom that create the form body and the true body, or the truth body, as we say, of the Buddha. And it all begins with compassion. The Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh says, I lost my page here, let me see. He says, the more compassionate you are, the more generous you can be. And it's from that generosity that the perfection of wisdom, the perfection of giving arises, the perfection of wisdom arises, and in turn all the other perfections arise. So it's essential that even if we don't fully grasp these concepts at first, that we grasp the need for compassion. There's a very simple practice that we've been talking about on the blogs for the last few days, especially in our 7-pointed mind training. And that practice is to say to yourself, not necessarily to anyone else, but to begin in your mind by saying, I love you. And that practice in and of itself is incredibly powerful. But then couple that with saying, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and namaste. And when you do this, when you're speaking to that scared little child that exists within you, then you begin to calm that chatter, that endless dualistic conversation that's going on in your mind, and you return back to zero, you return back to shunyata. Compassion is the key that opens the door to the way of the Bodhisattva. The way of the Bodhisattva is the path of enlightenment to all sentient beings. Now you may call this the Bodhisattva way, you may call this the way of the cosmic Christ, you may call this simply the Dharma of compassion. In the new dictionary of Christian ethics and pastoral theology, the compassion is described as being something that's both the emotional experience when a person is moved by the suffering of others, and the act of entering into that suffering itself for the purpose of relieving it. So again, even within the dictionary of Christian ethics and pastoral theology, there's this notion, this understanding of the importance of Tonglen, of taking in and taking in and giving back, taking on the suffering, sending out love, and recognizing, most importantly, that every single experience that we have in this life, in this precious lifetime, is a reflection of something going on in ourselves. So when we begin to increase that awareness and we begin to take 100% responsibility for our experiences, then we're able to begin to transform the world because we're transforming ourselves. The entire world is within us, and we are the entire world. And a way of putting this in terms for those who come from theistic traditions is to say God is in me and I am in God. The entire universe that you experience is a reflection of something within yourself. And so when you begin to become mindful of that, you become empowered. You recognize the awesome responsibility you have to see the sacred in all things, because it's a reflection of that sacred core, that thread of whether we call it shunyata, emptiness, the void, zero, spirit. It's that sacredness, that ground or groundlessness of being that you are. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Rabbi Jesus says that he's not the first person to pass by, or the person the Samaritan is not the first person to pass by the person who's in need. He says the two religious men, one priest and a Levite, passed by the man who was attacked and robbed and beaten to near death, and instead of helping, they turned their head and they walked on the other side of the road. Then along comes the Samaritan. The Samaritans were people who were despised by pious Jews because they were people who were of a mixed race. They were half Jewish and half Egyptian, or Jews who married Egyptians. And they often embraced a spirituality that drew from both traditions as well, from the ancient wisdom tradition. Sort of like a radical Franciscan monk who abandoned the purity of his Catholic, his life as a Catholic archbishop, to embrace the spirituality at his core that drew on both the Buddha Dharma and Eastern mysticism and the teaching of the cosmic Christ. So I'm sort of like that modern equivalent of what a Samaritan is, or was for Jesus' time. So they see this person who's radical and who's a nonconformist and who doesn't follow a pure, quote unquote, orthodoxy. And these holy men walk to the other side of the road rather than alleviating his suffering. Well, the Samaritan man sees this man beaten at the side of the road, and he had tremendous compassion stirred up within him, and risked being attacked himself, because obviously if someone beat up this man, then they could be lurking around there and beat him up. But the Samaritan didn't care about that. Compassion drew him to take practical actions to alleviate this man's suffering. And so he bandaged his wounds and put him on his own animal and took him to a hotel or an inn to be cared for at the Samaritan's expense. You see, the word in scriptures for attorney, for lawyer, doesn't mean attorney. It actually means a theological student, somebody who studied Mosaic law. So they were an expert on law. And we read that Jesus turned to the theology student, to the lawyer, and said, "Which one of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the student replied, obviously, the one who showed him mercy. And then Rabbi Jesus turned to him and said, "Then you should go and do the same thing." In almost 27 years of teaching the Dharma, actually closer to 30 years now, and a quarter century of which has been spent wearing the Franciscan habit, I've seen extraordinary things happen in the climate of compassion. I've seen some amazing experiences as we took a group of students from a yoga center onto the street to feed the homeless for the first time. And not only did those extraordinary experiences happen to them, but they happened to me as well. One of my first times of going on the street and bringing meals to the homeless in Atlanta, in Woodruff Park, was that I saw this little elderly black man sitting on the side of a fountain. It was November, and it was beginning to get very cold, and so the fountain was empty, and he had his head down and his eyes closed. And I went over to him with a couple of the bag lunches and said, "Sir, have you eaten?" And he got stirred and said, I'm sorry, I'm moving, I'm getting ready to move." And I said, no, you don't have to move. And he said, "I'm sorry, I was just resting." he was so filled with fear. And when I finally got his attention and put my hand on his shoulder, and I said, no, we're just bringing some sandwiches out to folks who might be hungry, and I wondered if you'd eaten and if you were hungry and would like one. And I sat down with him and we began to talk, and he started eating the first of the sandwiches, and I gave him a couple extras to put in his little knapsack. And he said to me something that will always strike me very powerfully. He said to me that I was the first person in 2 years who had ever touched him. Think about that. Let that story impact your life the way it's impacted mine. Imagine what it would be like to go through 2 years without having someone touch you. And when you see someone on the street, when you see somebody who's suffering, you never know what their story is. You never know what led them to respond or react in that sort of way. And so I remind myself and try and remind myself of that whenever I'm tempted to respond in a harsh and uncompassionate way. Again, this is all about the practice of showing compassion toward those who are suffering, regardless of the reason for their suffering. Could it be their fault? Yes. Every experience that we have is our fault. But compassion takes that one step further and says, every experience of everyone around me is a result and a reflection of what's going on inside me. So if someone is suffering, that's an opportunity for me to clear the cause of that suffering within myself, to purify that cause of suffering, so that in doing so, I eliminate the suffering for everyone else. So I thank you for spending time to read this material and really consider it. Your assignment for this week it was given to you actually last week. It's the paper that you've got to write, and then you need to read the remainder of this first volume of Modern